Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Jordan and welcome to today's video. It is finally here. We are finally talking about my top 10 favorite books that I read in 2024. One of my favorites, if not my favorite video to film in the whole entire year, because I love gushing about books. I love loving things. I love recommending books and talking about the specific things that I love in books so that they can find other people who love them. I love when people come back and tell me that they read my recommendations or favorite books and tell me that they loved them. I just love spreading the love and positivity about books in general. So I'm excited to do that today. This year is interesting because I have been a little bit vocal about being in a slump this year, not with my reading in terms of numbers. I've read a lot of books, approximately just as many as I've read in the years past, but I've had a very low number of 5-star books. So I've been calling it my rating slump. To put that into numbers, I've had 6 5-star books out of the 121 books that I read this year. That is less than 5%, and that's definitely less than I've had any year previously that I've been reading as an adult and tracking my reading. I don't know why it is. I'm picking up books that I'm hopeful will be 5 stars, and I have a lot of 4-star books, so I am enjoying what I'm reading. I'm just missing a large number of those 5-star favorites. I don't know why that is. I'm hoping I can fix it for 2025. But that does mean that this top 10 list is made up of 6 5-star books and then 4 notable 4-star books, which is just very interesting and required me to do a lot more introspection and reevaluation of my ratings to find the 4-star books that really rose above the rest, stuck in my mind, and that I want to put in my top 10 favorites of the year video and list. So it's gonna be a fun time. I think that's all of the preamble that I need before getting into the books themselves. And I'm actually going to start with 2 honorable mentions for this list because I have 2 books that I rated 4 stars throughout the year, but that I want to continue spreading a little bit more love towards, but I've already done it in some other videos. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about them here, but in the number 12 position, I want to shout out Another First Chance by Robbie Couch. This is a young adult sci-fi book with queer representation and a lot of emotional elements to it. I talked about this in my 2024 Hidden Gems video. So if you missed that one and want to hear my thoughts about this favorite book of that category, then please go check it out because it definitely is an honorable mention favorite of the year. And then in my number 11 position is The Husbands by Holly Gramazio, which I featured in my top 10 book of the month books video. And again, I don't want to talk too long about it here, but it definitely stuck out as a favorite that has lingered and stood the test of time, and I want to recommend. It is an adult contemporary book with kind of a speculative sci-fi-ish element to it, and I really loved it. So go hear me talk about it more in that video. And that brings us to the official top 10, and I'm starting with kind of an unexpected favorite, Attached at the Hip by Christine Riccio. I say unexpected for a couple of reasons. One is that I have read one other book by this author and it was just okay. It was 3 stars. So I wasn't necessarily expecting anything, you know, extremely mind-blowing for her release this year. She is a former booktuber turned author tuber. She makes videos about her writing process that I do enjoy watching. And this book is a contemporary romance book that follows this main character who goes on to a reality TV show that is like The Bachelor or Bachelor in Paradise meets Survivor, and it pairs couples up and ties them together physically. And I expected this book to be fun, but I didn't necessarily expect it to be as fun as it was and for me to just eat it up as much as I did. Admittedly, I love competition reality TV shows. That is really the only TV that I watch on a regular basis. I watch The Challenge on MTV, I watch Survivor, and recently I got a Peacock subscription, so I've been watching things like The Traitors, Deal or No Deal Island, things like that. So the premise of this book definitely appealed to me specifically, and I just loved reading this book and seeing it play out. I wanted to see if this main character found love. I wanted to see if she ended up winning the show, and I just thought it was so fun. And it's one of those books that when I scroll through all of the books that I read in 2024, I see that cover and it brings me joy. Is it a literary masterpiece? No. But was it so much fun that I couldn't not put it on this list? Yes. Number 9 on my list was not released this year. It's one of only a few books on my favorites list that came out in years prior. This one came out in 2022, and since its release, I've heard a few people talk about it and even recommend it to me in a way that I figured I would really enjoy it. But it is a memoir about somebody that I don't know a lot about, so I was a little bit hesitant, but it's called Deaf Utopia by Niall DeMarco. And even having really no idea who this person was before picking up his memoir, it was still so powerful and interesting that it has to go on my favorites list, and I absolutely recommend it to anyone who is either familiar with him or unfamiliar with him and curious about the life of a notable deaf person, or you're particularly drawn to memoirs in general. Niall DeMarco is deaf, and he's been on a couple of reality TV shows, so he is somewhat of a celebrity now. He actually won America's Next Top Model and participated on Dancing with the Stars, so I'm not really sure how I didn't know who he was. Again, being that I love reality competition shows, but this book is about his experiences going through those reality TV experiences, but also just about his life in general, being a deaf person. I have little to no experience with deaf people in my real life. I've consumed a few pieces of media about deaf, culture and individuals, but definitely not a lot. So I have a lot to learn about that experience, and I was more than happy to pick up this book with that being my main intention, just to gain another, experience and learn about somebody's life who is so different from mine. It was entertaining because it did shed some light on his experiences on these shows. Not all of them positive, which was really interesting to learn about. And it was overall just an impactful memoir because it did give me that insight to somebody's life that, again, is so different from mine and in a lot of ways so much harder, but just as rich. So I love being reminded of that message. And I would say that this is my favorite memoir that I read this year. Okay, baby alarm has gone off, so enjoy or apologies for baby feeding noises for the rest of this video. Okay, where was I? Number 8 on this list is Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. This is a book I read way back in January, and I wasn't expecting to enjoy it as much as I did. I also wasn't really planning on picking it up before I did. I actually co-hosted a book club discussion for this book on Gabby's channel from Gabby Reads, which I was honored to be included on, and even more excited once I read the book and actually really enjoyed it. This book is commonly marketed as a mystery thriller, but I think that's a little bit inaccurate. It's much more, in my opinion, of a historical fiction book with a fairly strong crime element to it, because it is inspired by and kind of retells the story of Ted Bundy and his sorority house murders. And that's not a story I was very familiar with before reading this book. I don't really care for true crime. I don't care much for serial killer stories. So I'm glad that this wasn't that, in that it really didn't follow much the actual action of what happened. And it also does not center the serial killer in the story. It very intentionally centers the women who were the victims in this story and how they bonded together through this incident, how they helped each other through this incident, and basically highlighted their resilience directly in spite of and overshadowing what this dumb man did. I was really touched by several portions in this book. There were many lines that resonated with me and made me really sit back and think about them, which is not something that happens often when I'm reading. And I think my enjoyment of this book was only emphasized by the book club discussion because it was so fun really diving into this book, all of the messages within it, and getting to celebrate women a little bit. That is a theme that will come back later in this list. All right, number 7 on this list is Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Farida Abike Iyomide. This is the second book that I've read by this author and the second book that I've really enjoyed. This is a young adult mystery thriller set at a boarding school, following this main character who enters the school year late because of some things that have happened in her personal life. And because she comes in late, her experience joining this school is a little bit rocky. A student is found dead at the school, and so our main character finds herself solving the mystery of what happened to him. There are a lot of things I loved about this book. I loved the atmosphere of this boarding school. That is a really fun and interesting setting, and I think this book did play that up a lot. I also really enjoyed the diversity of all of the characters in this book. It seems to be done in a nonchalant enough way that it didn't feel forced, but also an intentional enough way that it did matter. So that was great. The mystery itself, I don't think was the strongest part of this book. I do think it's important to note that I do enjoy young adult mystery thrillers in general, so I understand that with them usually comes a little bit of angst and a little bit of convenience. and they're not always the most well plotted and well written mysteries, but a lot of times they offer commentary on deeper issues, and that's what this one did as well. So that's what I really respected about this book. I enjoyed it from start to finish, and I can't wait to continue to see what this author writes. Number 6 on my list is another nonfiction book, and it's called Thirst by Scott Harrison. This is a memoir slash just informational nonfiction book about the charity called Charity Water. This author is the founder of that charity, and it talks about not only his life experiences that brought him to starting this charity, but also walks through some of the details and intricacies of starting a nonprofit or a charity that were really interesting to me. And I thought this book did such a good job of pairing like the emotional elements of this author's life and what drove him towards this mission with the really interesting logistical elements of running a nonprofit that I had no idea about previously. I've never really thought about. And the specific thing that I enjoyed about this book is that it was moving without being intimidating. And by that I mean this author made the very clear point that he was not driven to philanthropy through his whole life. He was not always a charitable person. He actually went through some really rough times in his life, and that's part of what drove him towards his mission. But he makes the point that one, it's never too late to find a cause to be passionate about and start making a difference towards that cause. And two, there's no effort that's too small towards whatever cause it is that you're passionate about. You don't necessarily have to be the one to start a nonprofit to make a difference. There are all kinds of ways to make a difference, whether it's to one individual or to an entire community in need. And all of them are important, and every person's kind of story of giving and being charitable is noble. And I appreciated that message because I think it's easy to be overwhelmed by all of the bad in the world, all of the need, all of the hardships, and to feel like, okay, I'm only one person, what can I do? And also what I've been doing so far has been so insignificant, and how can I possibly do enough in the future to make up for that? I really appreciated that this kind of addressed and eased those insecurities in me, and I think that that's something that should be noted in recommending this book to other people. So whether you are already familiar with the water crisis in the world, or like me, you really knew nothing about it, this is a book that I would wholeheartedly recommend to give you a little bit more information about it through the lens of this very specific person and charity. Number 5 on my favorites list this year is The Dime a Die by Kate Quinn. This is a book that I went into fully expecting to love. It's a historical fiction book. I've read several books by Kate Quinn, and I've given nearly all of them 5 stars. She writes women's stories from history. This one is about a female sniper in World War II and how she earns her nickname Lady Death. And it really was everything I typically enjoy about historical fiction, and specifically Kate Quinn's books. It was emotional, it was interesting, it was hard-hitting, it was informational about a time period that I was not alive. I know a lot of people are somewhat critical of the number of World War II historical fiction books that are out there, and that is fair. I agree there are a lot, but I still glean a lot of things from those stories, and specifically this is a perspective that I did not feel like I've read before, so I would highly recommend it if you enjoy Kate Quinn, if you enjoy historical fiction, if you enjoy badass strong female women. This is all of those things, so I loved it. Speaking of historical fictions with strong badass women, my number 4 favorite book is The Frozen River by Ariel Lawhon. This is set way back in the 1700s and follows a midwife who finds herself in the middle of this criminal investigation when a man's body is found in the river, and he was being accused of a sexual assault towards a woman in this community. And because our main character is a midwife, she interacts with most of the women in the community. She receives a lot of information about what is going on behind closed doors to these women, and she keeps meticulous notes in her journals to mostly help with her job, but they end up coming in handy towards this investigation. This book is particularly interesting because it is based on a real woman, and this author has an author's note at the end of this book that talks about how she learned about this woman in history and used her actual journals in the crafting and writing of this book, and I found that to be really interesting. And besides being all of the things that I already mentioned about historical fiction that I love, emotional, informational, I think this one is particularly recommendable because it is not set in World War II, and it is a very different perspective from what most people are used to reading in historical fiction. Don't be intimidated by how far back it's set. It really doesn't feel that historical It's written in a very easy to understand, accessible way, but it's a very interesting story that I'm glad got told, and I'm glad that I read and loved. Okay, now we get to talk about some swoony romances. So my number 3 favorite book of the year is Something Wild and Wonderful by Anita Kelly. This is a male-male romance about these two men whose paths cross as they are both hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. And they are both on their journeys for different but equally emotional reasons. They end up opening up to each other about what those reasons are. This book I thought had a great balance between the light and the heavy because they are both going through a lot, but their connection is just so strong that it is also just adorable and swoony at the same time. So I loved this book. I have really enjoyed all of Anita Kelly's books that I've read so far, so I will continue picking them up. And so if a queer, outdoorsy, emotional romance sounds up your alley and you haven't picked this one up yet, I highly recommend doing so. The other romance in my top 10 at the number 2 position is This Could Be Us by Kennedy Ryan. Kennedy Ryan is one of my favorites, if not my favorite, emotional contemporary romance author. This is the second book in a series. The first book was This Could Be Us. Loved that one as well. It was on my favorites, I think 2 years ago when it was released. And the second book follows the love story of another woman who's friends with the main character of the first book, so you can read them out of order if you want to. This follows a woman who at the start of this book is married, and she's married to the most awful man who ends up getting arrested for a workplace crime. And then this main character has to deal with not only losing the man she loves physically, but also emotionally, as she comes to terms with understanding that he's not the man that she thought he was. And now she has to care for her children single-handedly, earn a living when she didn't have to do that before. And then on top of that, she feels attraction to the man who was kind of the one to put her husband behind bars. So it's a very complex story, and what I love about that is that it mimics real life, because real life is complicated. I love that Kennedy Ryan does not shy away from difficult topics, and she creates such complex characters that feel so real, and you just end up feeling so hard for by the end of the story. I just loved this book so much, and I cannot wait for the third and I think final book in this series to come out next year. This is also one of my absolute top favorite book covers out of the whole year, and I'm so glad that what's inside matches what's outside in that regard, and the story is just so good. Kennedy Ryan's writing is so good, and I'm so glad that she is finally starting to get a lot of hype in the book community, because this book and the books that I've read from her so far all are so deserving of all that hype. And last but not least, my number 1 favorite book of 2024 is probably not going to come as any surprise, because I have talked about it several times this year. I raved about it when I first read it on my channel. I talked about it in my top 10 favorite book of the month books of the year. It's The Women by Kristen Hanna, another author that I've read many books from and loved many books from before. Another historical fiction book featuring a very strong female main character. This one is an army nurse who joins the army and goes to Vietnam for the war. And this book is so emotional. I think it's probably one of the very few books that made me tear up several times throughout reading it. The first half of this book tells her story while she is actually in the war and what that experience was like. So very high stakes, high action, very emotional when she loses people close to her, and as it talks about what she has to go through as a nurse. And then the second half of this book is telling her story once she gets home from the war, and how that experience was equally difficult for her, maybe more so difficult for her, because of the complete just ignorance and erasure of all of the women who served in the Vietnam War, and how this main character and her PTSD and her struggles after returning from the war were completely ignored, and how she got comments straight to her face of people saying there were no women in Vietnam, for example, and the toll that that takes on her, in addition to, again, the loss that she has suffered through her experiences in the war. This book is just so heartbreaking, but at the same time you can't help but root for her and want her to heal and find her loved ones that will support her and just have good things happen to her, because she is such a good person in doing what she did to serve in this war. It was a reading experience that I will remember for a very long time because this book had such an emotional impact on me. It's a book that will last in my memory for a long time. It's one that I would wholeheartedly recommend to anyone who enjoys historical fiction. Again, it's not one set in World War II, so it is a little bit different, and I'm just really happy that I read this book right when it came out. I was a part of the hype. I love the hype that it's getting. I think it's very well deserving of all of the, you know, awards and accolades and love that it's getting. I expect it to be on the top of a lot of people's favorites lists this year. We'll see if that comes true, but if it does, I love to see it. And I hope that I can encourage a few more people to read it because I do think it is worth the read. So that's it. Those are my top 10 favorite books of 2024. Let me know all your thoughts. Let me know if you have read any of the books that I mentioned. And if you agree with my love and my thoughts, let me know if I've convinced you to pick any of these books up that you haven't read. And lastly, let me know what your favorite book or favorite books of 2024 are. Let's spread all of the love for this year of reading. Other than that, I don't think I have anything else. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you in my next one.